So hello everyone, I'm Mary and I'm going to talk about partnerships I've had both with a previous tenant and my current tenant. And so just to start off, here is a picture of my favorite bobolink taken on my farm by Phil Specht. And he represents everything. He's on a fence post. He's not in a native prairie. So I wanted everyone to know that the pictures that I'm showing you today, the bird and insect photos, were taken by Phil Specht. That's a picture of Phil here in his pickup truck. He has a camera and he would use that as a bird blind and drive around the farm in different places and photograph the birds and the insects and plants. And so my photographs are all from the farm. They're not from the internet. My farm is located in northeast Iowa, between the two northeasternmost counties, Alameda and Clayton. My farm is in Clayton County, where the Black Star is on the map on the right. It's about 4 miles from the Mississippi River as the bobolink flies. And this whole area in green that you see, which is part of Alameda and part of Clayton County, is part of a globally important bird area. And it was designated that status by the National Audubon Society in 2014, mainly for the nesting habitat for cerulean warblers. So my farm is called Prairie Quest Farm. It's about 120 acres, and you can see it on this map on the left side. It's outlined in a black line, so it's more or less a rectangle with a little bit of a bootleg at the bottom that's part of a valley. I have about 60 acres of cool season pasture, 45 acres of forest and savanna in the valley, 10 acres of a reconstructed prairie, which is located on the near northeast side, 5 acres for the farmstead, and 4 ponds. And then here are just some photos of the farm itself, a couple pictures near the farmstead. The left has the house, which I currently don't reside in, and a windmill that is it's still creaking and blowing in the wind. It's not connected to the well, but it still functions. And there's a mulberry tree growing right there with the well. And then there's a walnut tree with the tanks that used to have gasoline and diesel fuel. Here's a close-up tree of the walnut tree or the mulberry tree. This tree is absolutely wonderful and is a bird magnet. And so it's one of my trees where several days of the year I will just sit in my car with my binoculars and watch this tree for birds. It's amazing. And then here's a picture of the north pasture, north of the farmhouse, looking to the east and looking towards the valley. So you can see the trees on the edge of the pasture, which is savanna in this area. And in the sort of the lower center, well, upper part of the pasture on the left side, it's brown. And that area is the reconstructed prairie. So when I was taking a picture at this time, the prairie vegetation looked quite different than the pasture in the fall. And here's a close-up picture of the reconstructed prairie, kind of at a peak. For those of you that are familiar with Alan Savory and his grazing management, this area was trampled, and which means it was heavily trampled by the cattle when they were heading down to the pond, more so than Phil would have liked. But the result was just a flush of plants and flowers, and it was just amazing that particular year. So my friend Dan Specht, who's in these two pictures here, he owned the farm for a number of years. He purchased it back in the 80s and owned it up through 2013. And he started learning how to graze and hay for grassland birds. And so today there have been birds on the farm for over 20 years. He learned how to manage the pasture for high quality grass fed and finished beef as well as the birds. And then sadly, Dan was killed in a tractor accident on his farm in 2013. But what Dan would used to say, Dan had a degree in biology, an undergraduate degree in biology, but he studied more the birds, from observation and what they were doing and how he could improve their habitat on the farm. So he had a philosophy: if the birds are on the farm, it's all working. And he meant by that that it's a functioning, working ecosystem. So it's functioning in a similar way to a prairie. And the photos here were taken by Jean Simmet. She is a former journalist working for an agricultural newspaper, and she was at Dan's field day in the late 2010, near approximately 2010. So these are some of the grassland birds that she photographed at that time. So a high quality pasture is a grassland, and it provides habitat, which means food, perches, nesting materials, and nesting sites for many grassland birds. It can, and it does on my farm. And my farm is a diverse mix of perennial grass, cool season grasses and legumes, and then other forbs, and it's rotationally grazed with a number of different paddocks. And I should explain here my background. I'm a plant ecologist. I'm not a farmer. I didn't grow up on a farm, but over the years, I've spent a lot of time sampling plants in a number of different habitats. So when I first took over the farm, I needed to understand from Phil, my first renter, um, what he meant by this needs to be grazed a little more, this has been grazed too much, this area is ready to go. And so I did what comes naturally to me, was to sample the plants. So I started out with sampling 100-foot transects. So you can see the yellow tapes on the two photographs on the right and left. They're 100 feet long. And then every 10 feet, I would have what I call a quadrat. And that's the 1 by 2 foot rectangle that is a carpenter's ruler extended. And then I would document the species and their abundance in each one of these quadrats. So I'd have 10 sampling sites within one of these transects. So over the years, that's how I got to know the pasture and the pasture plants and grazing. So for the system that Dan developed that works quite well is the cattle replace the browsing bison and elk from the past, and he managed that by moving the animals themselves, by rotating the animals so that they mimic the natural herbivores in the previous prairie system. And then the cattle graze in a paddock until they take half and leave half of the grasses. So that's where an experienced grazier would be able to see that. And I wasn't experienced, so I didn't know. So I was taking my measurements. But with experience, that's how you notice. Then it's time to move the animals. And then what's really important with the system is that each paddock is rested. So they're rested until the plants have adequate biomass or leaves so that they can photosynthesize and not use too much of their root biomass. So that's what's really important, is the amount of rest that the paddocks receive. So on the right side, you can see I put a ruler in, and you can see where some of the grasses were chewed off to a certain level. And so this particular system works very well for providing habitat for grassland birds. It provides a number of different grass heights and maturities of the plants themselves. And so the result is a number of these different species can nest on the farm. They find adequate habitat. And so on my farm, there are eastern meadowlarks, bobolinks, dick sisal, and sedge wrens that I know nest on the farm. Savannah sparrow has been documented on the farm. I'm not sure if it nests on the farm, but you can see in the diagram from left to right, the grass heights get taller. So on my farm, we graze my tenants graze to a medium height level that works well for good pasture as well as grassland bird habitat. And something a lot of people don't realize is how much in trouble grassland birds are. So this was a study that was conducted either by Cornell Lab or the Audubon Society, or a combination of both, that grassland birds have declined by 53% since 1970 in the United States and Canada. So in terms of a group of birds by habitat, compared to the eastern forest birds, or the western forest birds, or shorebirds, they're declining more than any other group of species. So that's why it's important for someone like myself and Dan to Dan in the past and Nick and myself now to continue providing habitat for the birds. And the figure on the left side is just showing how many birds, just all birds. We've lost 3 billion birds since 1970. So I purchased the farm in 2015, and my goal was to basically continue what Dan had been doing, to manage the farm the same way without having his skill set. So his brother, Phil Specht, offered to work with me at first. So he was my first tenant farmer. And he decided he should enroll the farm in the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and look for different activities that would possibly improve the grazing or maintain the grazing, and also improve the habitat overall of the farm. So that's what we did. And together, the two of us went through, I think there were over 100 activities at that particular time. We read through all of them, and Phil knew the grazing and farm management, and I knew about plants. So together, we came up with 9 different activities that would help to meet my goals. And they're basically in 3 categories: maintaining the pasture, which I call grazing for grassland birds, and restoration, which is one of my research areas, so planting plants for pollinators, and then research and education. So one of the goals was to make sure that the cattle were moving throughout the grazing season by dividing the larger pastures into smaller paddocks. When Dan had the farm, he moved the animals with temporary fence posts and temporary wires. And that's fine. That just takes more time and work. So Phil decided it might be best to establish paddocks without the temporary fence posts, but with metal fence posts and barbed wire, and I'm sorry, electric wire. So that was one activity that Phil worked on and completed. And then we also wanted to make sure that the plants weren't overgrazed. And so there are different activities to monitor the plants, and also by moving the salt block, the supplement and feeding areas, that also would move the cows around to different locations. So here is a bucket that Phil put together. It's just a 5-gallon bucket that he taped a ruler on the side of, and he used this in 10 different bird plots. He had 6 bird plots on his farm and 4 on my farm. And he was studying, he was measuring the height of the grass to learn what heights the birds preferred for nesting. So the picture on the 2 pictures on the right side are earlier in the season, when you can see dandelion is in flower. And the one on the left is a little bit later in the season, the grass is a little bit taller. And that particular photo is looking at the pasture down at the pond where the prairie is located. Something Phil wanted to do, and I followed in his lead, is he all along wanted farmers to be able to do this. He didn't want measurements or anything to be cumbersome. So he and I both, we bought any of our supplies at the local farm and home store. So anything was available to any farmer. It wasn't something that needed to be bought at a scientific supply house. So again, here's one of my measurements. On the left side is a transect and what I call Dan Bird 1. And so you can see the yellow tape. And then when I got to my quad number 4 at 40 feet on the tape, I found a bird's nest. And so you can see the bird's nest there within the grass, and the grass has been eaten. And then on the right side, a close-up of the bird's nest. And this is probably a bobolink's nest. This is the only nest I've ever found in the 10 years I've owned the farm. I've never seen a bobolink or a meadowlark nest. I have seen the red-winged blackbird nests, but the bobolink's nest right on the ground in an open nest. And this one looks a little closed. I'm not sure if it was damaged when eggs were in the nest or if that happened afterwards. I just happened to find it. It happened to be right in my quad. Otherwise, I would have never seen it. Then our other area that we were interested in was education and research. So we wanted to teach farmers about adaptive management grazing, and then we also wanted to study the soils in the pasture and the restored prairie and in the undisturbed soils. So there were two different CSP activities that helped us achieve those goals. So here was a field day that we hosted through PFI in 2017, the card announcing the field day. And on the bottom left, Phil is out in the pasture with a group of people explaining his grazing methods. And on the right side, there's a group of people looking at birds out in the pasture. And for some of you that have explored the PFI website, you might recognize those people on the Find a Farmer webpage, but they came from my farm and they were finding birds. So then ecological restoration was the third area I was interested in. And so my goals were to plant new prairie and then also to add seed to the established prairie that Dan had planted in 2008. So there were three different activities that were part of that, or two different activities part of that. And then another goal was planting hedgerow shrubs and trees for a farm border, mainly along the county road, but also to the north side of the farm. So I have some pictures here of the shrub planting. Um, as a botanist, I know where to look to find out the native plants that grow in Clayton County. And so I came up with a list that you can see here: aronia, arrowwood, chokecherry, elderberry, gray dogwood, hazelnut, nannyberry, ninebark, serviceberry, and wild plum. Um, all of these, except for aronia, occur in Clayton County naturally. Aronia occurs in Winneshiek County, so I included it on my list of plants to plant. And I purchased the seedlings from the Iowa DNR State Forestry Nursery. So here's some pictures of the plantings. So on the left, you can see flags, yellow and orange flags. And each one of those flags is where one of the seedlings is planted. And I've been planting shrubs. Phil and I planted shrubs together. I planted shrubs with different people over the years, 4 or 5 different years. And so there's different species at different times being planted, depending on what's in stock at the nursery. And so it's just sort of a mixture of plants. But in some parts of the farm border along Iris Avenue, there is already hedgerow. So we just added plants to that. And then in other places, there's really only grapevine that's growing along the border fence. But on the right side, you can see what a ninebark seedling looks like and what a hackberry seedling looks like the years that they were planted. And they were planted, we used shovels and digging tools to plant them. We didn't use any machinery to plant the shrubs and trees. Then in 2022, so Phil retired in 2019. He had been my tenant farmer for 5 years. And I knew all along he was going to retire. He was retirement age, and he said he would help me out to get started to turn it over to someone else. So I knew that all along. But unfortunately, it happened right at the beginning of coronavirus. So he wasn't helping me with the farm anymore. So in 2020, I needed to find someone else to rent the farm. And there, were coronavirus challenges with travel, and NRCS offices weren't open, even for some of 2021. So it was a difficult time to try to find someone to rent. And I did put my name and a description of my farm on the PFI Find a Farmer website. And I hosted a field day at my farm. And that was an educational experience, because what I learned was that my farm's needs and my needs aren't quite met for a beginning farmer that's looking for a smaller acreage or also looking to graze sheep or goats. I really wanted cattle on my farm because I know that system works for the grassland birds. And also, I didn't have a house for someone to rent. The farmhouse needs a lot of work, and I currently rent an apartment myself. So I needed to find the right person at the right time to rent my pastures, and someone established that had the finances to own a number of animals and to be able to graze the 60 acres of pasture that I had. So I was fortunate in 2023 that I was able to find that person. Oh, let's see. First of all, let me go back and show some pictures. My farm, when it wasn't grazed, there was a lot of goldenrod and asters, and a lot of bees. So it really converted very quickly to goldenrod. Um, One of the benefits of that time period was I did have a professional ornithologist come out to the farm. Didn't have to worry about electric fences or animals to get around. And so Rick Zarwell, who lives in Alameda County, he came out to my farm 4 different times and compiled a species list of what he saw and heard. And so during that time, he found 63 different species, and including ruffed grouse, which to him, that was the prized bird of all the birds that he found. And there's a picture of ruffed grouse that I took in where I live in southern Indiana. And on the next page here, we can see there's a list of, if you look on the third column from the right, down at the bottom family name, that's where you can see bobolink, eastern meadowlark. Orioles are more tree birds, but red-winged blackbirds live in the pastures. Brown-headed cowbirds do as well. And then the next column, he has some of the warblers that we're passing through. And at the very far bottom right is the dickcissel. So he saw the grassland birds that I knew lived on the farm. So now coming to Nick, my current tenant, Nick and his family. So they've been grazing on my farm since the spring of 2023. So here's a long list of how Nick and I had worked together, and how what he does helps me keep my farm in a pasture system where the farm is producing food and it's also producing habitat for the grassland birds. So he rotationally grazes and manages the pastures for the cattle and the bird habitat. And it was his son and daughter, who are now in high school, that learned this grazing management from Phil, who's also a neighbor. We're all neighbors. Everybody lives within a mile of each other. And so they learned slowly how to graze an animal. They started out with one cow on Phil's farm and learned how to move it around, and learned to measure the grass and what the grass should look like when it was time to move the animals. So they've learned that, and Nick has raised animals all his life. Most of his animals now are in a feedlot on their farm. Nick and his family, it took a number of people to build a permanent fence that I needed. The fence before was not in very good condition, and some of the fence was electric wire. So they built a permanent fence that borders the farm as well as exposes the forest and prairie boundaries. And then he also reseeded the pasture. So he and his son broadcast red and white clover seed and alfalfa. And the clovers really decreased in abundance when I wasn't grazing the farm, the 3 years that the farm wasn't grazed. The grasses got really tall, the goldenrods came in, and the clovers were shaded out. So I needed more clover on the farm. And I want to put a thank out for Climate Land Leaders for helping me pay for the seed. And then with deer hunting, in Northeast Iowa, deer hunting is very popular and it's part of the culture. And it's taken me a little while to really get that. And there's 3 different seasons, at least that I'm aware of. There's the youth season, a first season, and a second season. And in the youth season, Nick's son and a friend of his hunt. And then the first season, Nick gave up the rights of, he allows Phil and his family and friends to still hunt as part of their long-term tradition of hunting that land. And then in the second season, Nick and a neighbor across the road hunt during the season at different times. And then all of them are providing me with deer meat for the hunting rights on my farm. And then we've had some water challenges. When I in 2023 was an interesting year. The Mississippi River flooded, and some of the highest flooding on the entire upper Mississippi was at the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers, which is 5 miles from my farm. So it was flooding there, but it was dry up on our ridge. We didn't have much rain June, July, August, and half of September. So the ponds, after a while, were becoming not so conducive for the animals to drink out of. So Nick brought water from his home farm in big tanks, and I had a water system that was not in very good shape. There was a well, an old cistern, and not in good shape. So I had to contact a contractor who came and repaired my system this August. So I have a new cistern, cleaned out cistern, repaired cistern, new pump, and a hydrant. And so now water is working on my farm. And then another challenge we had, which was unfortunate, is that um, we didn't receive drought payment for from the FSA for 2023 and the beginning of 2024. So Nick decided to purchase private insurance. So he bought pasture insurance for his farm, and he included my farm on his policy. So when I think about it, there's a lot of ways that we work together to help each other out to make, the farm a good place for the cattle, as well as my specific concerns about the birds. So here is a spreadsheet that Nick's daughter and son put together. They created this spreadsheet where they could document what paddock on my farm the animals were in, what date they moved in. They would measure the height of the grass when the animals came in, and the number of cow-calf pairs that came in, and the date the animals were moved out, the height of the grass when the animals were moved out, and the number of animals that were moved out. And then they have a note column on the far right side where they would explain if they added some more animals. So they did this throughout the season in 2023. And you can see that it was in July, sometime in July, where they moved the animals out because of the drought. The grass just wasn't regrowing. And over here on the left page, you can see down about midway, we have Prairie, MD Prairie. And a little further down, we have MD Goat Prairie or something like that. But anyway, the restored prairie, Dan would graze only during drought years. So this was a drought year, and so the prairie was grazed. And you can see how the prairie was 18 inches when the animals were moved in, and it was 3 inches when the animals moved out. And the other prairie was 25 inches, and again, 3 inches when they moved out. So I saw the prairies after they were grazed, and I was sad, but they came back. But anyway, it was just they were in there a long time, and they really grazed the prairie, much more so than you can see the other grass heights. They happened to be on vacation when the animals were in the prairie. And here are the spreadsheets for 2024, the same information, which this is great information. This is just great data. I'm really impressed by the son and daughter. And so the same information, but they were able to graze all the way through October, the beginning of October in 2024. Another benefit of the grazing is they graze unwanted plants. So I have quite a bit of wild parsnip on my farm. It came in from the roadside and has been moving east across my pasture, especially when the farm wasn't grazed. And I would go out and cut them. I would dig them. They're biennials, so I would dig them in the rosette stage. And but then when the cows came, it made such a difference. So in the left picture, you can see I measured a plant that was 20 inches high. And then in the right, you can see on the other side of the fence that hasn't been grazed, I have the ruler, the yardstick, And the plants, the yellow flowers of the wild parsnip, are much higher than 3 feet tall. So the grazing is a real benefit to getting rid of unwanted plants. Then Nick and his dad and a number of family members and even neighborhood friends came together to help build the barbed wire fence. So they had their own equipment, the skid steer with a hammer on the front that would put in the wood fence posts. And the east side of my farm near the valley is very thin soil. So um, yeah, the hammer came in was probably required in order to put in some of those wood fence posts. And I'm going to show you a couple slides of my beautiful fence I'm so happy about. The top right photo is looking at the fence. The pasture is on the foreground and the prairie is in the background. And so in this area, you can see there's an opening, and that's where a gate is now. And the gate's there to keep the animals out most of the time, but the animals will be able to graze in a drought, or maybe every 3 to 5 years if there isn't a drought, just um, to graze the prairie and benefit the prairie in that way. And then the bottom left picture is another picture of the prairie on the right side and the pasture on the left. You can see how long it is and straight. And then they built fence separating the pasture from the forest savanna as well. I put my farm into the forest reserve system, so I need to document that I'm keeping the animals out of the forest and savanna. So you can see the nice long fences that they built in those areas. And as I mentioned earlier, hunting is a big part of the culture in Northeast Iowa. All my neighbors contact me about wanting to hunt on my land. And so I was able to work that out with Nick and his family and another neighbor and with Phil, so that I think I can keep a few people happy. And so these are pictures that Nick's son put up a trail camera in the woods in the forest in my farm. So the left side you can see a male deer with his antlers, and the right side a female deer and her young. And then I want to end with some of the diversity of birds and insects on my farm. And again, all these photos were taken by Phil. So these are all birds that have lived on my farm at, at one time or another. So some of these shorebirds I had to have a professional identify. They all look alike, but I have lesser yellowlegs, solitary sandpiper, one of the dowitcher species. And the shorebirds, it's interesting. Sort of there's this wisdom that it's not good to have animals in ponds, and it's not good for the water, it's not good for the vegetation around the ponds, but the shorebirds take advantage of the mudflats that are produced by some grazing, by the animals going up to drink water. So I have to say that there's a benefit to having the animals drink out of the ponds. And then a lot of the water birds, wood ducks, the pied-billed grebe, mallard family, buffleheads. Some of these nest on the farm. The wood duck does, the mallards do, the buffleheads and the grebe don't, but they're using my farm as a place to stop when they're migrating to a location where they will be nesting. And then there's the forest birds that live in the valley. The red-headed woodpecker, the pileated woodpecker, red-bellied woodpecker, a black-billed cuckoo, the phoebe, and then the eastern bluebird all live in the woods on my farm. And grassland birds, the dickcissel, the song sparrow, the eastern kingbirds. The eastern kingbirds, I learned just this year, I knew where a nest was, and they nest in the grass, but they really like water. So oftentimes I see them perched near the ponds on tree branches, but they nest in the grassland. So I just learned that this year. And then of course goldfinches like the farm. And then a number of swallow species are around for a period during the summer. The tree swallows nest on the farm. Barn swallows nest on the farm as well. Now here are the special birds, the obligate grassland birds. So these they really require the grasses in order to nest, and they find their food as well in the grasslands, in the pastures. And so here we have a savanna sparrow. Like I said, I'm not sure if it nests on the farm, but it's definitely on the farm. A couple pictures of savanna sparrow up at the top, and then two pictures of the bobolink males on a multiflora rose bush. Below that, a bobolink and a meadowlark species. And then in the bottom left picture, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually 5 bobolink juveniles. The young look like the females. They're more brownish and a little bit goldish, and they blend in with the goldenrod very well. But there's 5, so we know that they're nesting and on the farm. And then my final slide is the insects. So there's a number of pollinators. Again, I've planted habitat for pollinators. There was the prairie that Dan had planted in 2008 for the pollinators and the plants. So there's a number of butterflies and bees and dragonflies and damselflies on the farm. So with that, I am finished and I'm ready to take any questions that anybody has.
All right. Thank you, Mary. It was really, really good. So as I said earlier in the introduction, if you have any questions for Mary, type them into the chat at the bottom of your screen. Which I just lost the chat. While we're waiting, I have a question for you. Oh, okay. I'll ask it in a minute. Someone else had a question. Do you have any tips or tricks on how you found a new farmer, especially one that lives close by?
Yes. Right place, right time. 3 years earlier, he wasn't ready. So he ended up purchasing some of the cows from Phil when he retired. So when Phil retired, Nick bought the animals and then he needed extra pasture. It was a really challenging time. I was trying to find someone and I was thinking and kind of hoping to have, a younger farmer come to the farm. But then I realized it's expensive to own cows. That's a very expensive animal to own compared to goats and sheep. Also, it takes someone that knows how to buy and sell the animals and raise the animals. So that was really tricky. And I'm fortunate in Northeast Iowa, there's still a number of farmers that raise, cattle. So I was fortunate to find someone and a neighbor. I was pretty lucky.
Okay. One of our audience members says you have really inspirational work. So just throwing that out there. But the question that they do have is, do you have any thoughts on what the optimal head or hooves per acre for the pasture and the prairie during drought?
Oh, during drought, I don't. I don't. I should look into that. But during a regular year, it's about 1 cow per acre for the grazing season. So, which it's a pretty productive system. If you compare that to out west in Colorado, it would be many acres per animal in the west. But it's about 1 cow per acre for the year. Is the level that myself and Phil and Nick and the kids, we all feel is sort of a good balance for having a productive pasture as well as the habitat for the birds.
All right. So while we're waiting to see if more questions pop up, the question that I had for you earlier was each year. So it sounds like your tenant is vaguely long term. What kind of conversations do you have if you either him or you want to put some new conservation on your property or expand current projects? I mean, what does that conversation kind of look like? the beginning of it?
Well, let's see. Um, well, let's see. I would say in general, probably the conversation would start with me. I think in terms of Nick, he's pretty happy with things, I think. I think something that the family's interested in, especially, is the hunting in the valley. So that just to make sure that's accessible and Nick and I, we communicate both by email and phone. So if there's a situation that arises, he'll just call me or send me an email, and he's very good about responding. And I try to be too, within a day. So we communicate quite well, and I think that's something that's really, really, really important for a relationship to work. Is just the communication, and I would say at various times we haven't understood each other, and especially the language. There's oftentimes the words that farmers use, I don't know what they mean. And I know, for Nick, there's words he doesn't know what I mean when I talk. I use a word that may be a more botanical term. So sometimes it's just clarifying what the other person means. But yeah, communication is very important. So um, yeah, right now I'm pretty happy with what. Oh, one thing I do want to talk to Nick about. So I'm glad you brought this up. I showed earlier my walnut tree, and my walnut tree is just prolific with little seedlings. And I've spent a lot of time, a lot of sweat, effort planting seedlings that I buy from the tree nursery. And so it's really nice when the walnuts just plant themselves. And so there are places there that are pretty lush in terms of grass, but I think I'm going to ask Nick to fence those off so that they can become more an area for walnut grove. And so that's something I want to talk to him about. But yeah, the cows, they don't kill the walnuts. They do eat their leaves, so they stunt the growth. So I've learned that from watching, and so I think I want to have those fenced off.
Okay, thank you. Just curious about that. But back to audience questions. Do you have any plans for how to continue your amazing conservation after you have passed on, just as you passed on Dan Speck's conservation legacy?
Well, right now, I'm hoping that Nick and his family will continue the farm. They live nearby, which makes it really nice. Nick has 3 kids, and I think 2 are interested in farming. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping. And at some point, I'll talk to Nick. We've only worked together for 2 years, so it's a little early to talk to him about that. But he would be more or less the natural person for me to pass the farm on to. He knows the farm, he knows the land, he knows the neighborhood. He's I don't know how many generations his family has had the farm nearby my farm, but a number of generations. Their last name is quite common in the area. So yeah. And back to your drought question, the drought question, I was just thinking about that. What we did, I mean, we weren't expecting a drought, it just happened. And so what happened was there were the smaller paddocks, and then with the drought, when the grass wasn't regrowing, um, some of the fences were taken down between the paddocks. So a paddock became, one small paddock became 3 in order to accommodate the animals to graze a larger area during the drought. And then larger and larger and larger areas, and then the grass just wasn't regrowing. So that's why they were taken off in July, and Nick took them back to his home farm and fed them hay at that time. It's really important not to overgraze. That has long-term impacts. So feeding them hay was the best solution during the drought.
Sorry, looks like we have a couple more. Sorry, I didn't know I was still muted. Um, any comments on mowing or clipping the pastures? This individual would like to provide spider habitat, and they're wondering about how your mowing routine is.
Let's see. I'm sorry. The person's interested in spider habitat.
It's a, yeah, provide spider habitat, which I would imagine can't.
With grazing and mowing, or
I might have to get them to clarify that. But maybe they're just talking about just mowing and clipping. Maybe like what is the routine on that, or what is the method for mowing and clipping of the pasture?
Okay, I don't. So it's
Mm.
completely grazed. I did during that period when I didn't have anyone to graze the farm. I was thinking of finding someone to hay the farm. Um, and then each year there was more and more goldenrod, and it just was I didn't even know who to contact. It was too complicated, so I didn't. I've never mowed the farm. I've only grazed the farm. And there are spiders. I do see spider webs, and of course in the prairie there's spiders. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, you may have just answered this a little bit. I think, can you go through like a complete grazing season from start to finish? Like, do you graze year round, or do you need bale grazing in winter, or um,
Okay.
kind of thing? Unroll the bales.
So my farm is since I own the farm now, it's different than when Dan owned the farm in the past. He did have animals there year round. The animals are only on my farm during the grazing season, so they move. Um, the animals come to the farm when the grass is a certain height, when it waves in the wind more or less. It's tall enough, and then the animals at that point, the grass is growing very quickly, so the animals can graze and move through a paddock. Yes, it is different at the beginning of the season because the grass grows fast and there's a lot of it. So actually, it may take them a little longer to get through a paddock than it does later in the season. And so, but again, what's really, really important is that regrowth period when it's rested. So that's what a good grazer will look for, is how tall the grass is it ready for the animals to move back to. So observational skills are very, very important. And measuring like the son and daughter are doing is really important to learn that. But it eventually, I think a person's eye will see that and know when it's time to move the animals. So then they just move until, like this past year, which was a decent year for precipitation, into October, when it just seems like the grass isn't regrowing. There was a drought. I mean, not a drought, but a dry period in, I believe it was either September, October. It didn't really rain. So normally the cool season grasses are active in the spring, dormant in the summer, and then active again in the fall. But because there wasn't rain this particular year, there wasn't a lot of regrowth for this fall flush. So um, I would say the animals are moved out anytime beginning to end of October, and they go back to their home farm.
I didn't know cattle moved around quite that much. All right. I haven't seen any other questions come through. So I will give it 1 minute. And if we do get one, I'll let you know. If you do have a question, again, I guess there's two sections at the bottom of the screen. There's a chat and a Q&A area. You can type a question into either one of those. And just a clarification on the spider habitat, it was spider habitat, by the way, and longer vegetation is better for spider habitat. So, um,
I have a lot of that, and the prairie is about 10 acres, and again, that's only grazed every 3 to 5 years. So there's a lot. And also, in the past, Dan was a certified organic farmer, so he had a 25-foot border on a lot of the farm, which along the county road, which is where I'm planting the shrub habitat, that's still that 25-foot border. So a lot of it, I've been planting into it, but a lot of that is still grass and goldenrods and asters. So there's still some tall plants in there that probably will eventually, I hope, be shaded out by my shrub plants. But right now there's still tall pasture plants.
all right.
And one thing,
I'll go
oh,
ahead. I'm sorry.
if someone has, I have one final comment whenever the questions are finished.
I'm going to read these questions in reverse of how they came in, because this one follows up on what you just said. How high will the shrub habitat grow?
You know, I bought shrubs that are different heights. Um, I different heights, and again, I showed that picture with the yellow flags. We're just planting them sort of. There isn't necessarily a plan, I guess is the best way to say it. The shrubs, I would say anywhere from maybe 5 to 15 feet. Some would be quite tall. Chokecherry can be tall. One of the viburnums can be quite tall, and then others are not as tall. Serviceberry is actually a small tree, so it's going to be sort of a diversity of a mix of intermingling with each other. And that's another benefit of the habitat along the shrub habitat is it's going to be for the shrub nesting birds. So right now, a lot of my hedgerow is honeysuckle. And I'm leaving it there because I know the catbirds and the northern cardinals and the mockingbirds are in there nesting. And so I'm planting the other trees and shrubs to come up through that, but I'm keeping the honeysuckle there. So there's still habitat. But anyway, yeah, that's it's for the shrub nesting birds and also just to have a border and for insects and just more life on the farm.
Um, do you add any fertilizer to the farm? And I'm assuming that's the tillable area. And if so, what and how much?
The farm is fertilized with the manure and urine from the cows. So no fertilizer, no chemical fertilizer.
All right. Oh, and I'll let you finish that comment you had
Yeah,
earlier.
I wanted to say that if people are interested in grassland birds and want to know what they can do, anyone and everyone could buy grass-fed or grass-finished beef. Um, because there's a lot of farms out there like mine where animals are raised on pasture. The farmers may or may not know that they have birds on their farm, but they may very well be providing habitat for the birds. So by buying, the beef that the animals are, even if they're grass-fed and maybe not grass-finished, there's still habitat for the birds. So I just want to say, if people are conservation minded, that's an action to do, is to buy from local farmers or stores that sell the grass fed or grass finished.